Good morning. My name is Sarah Dolinar, and I welcome you to the Unitarian Church of Staten Island on this beautiful Sunday, October 17, 2021. Every year for many years, the Unitarian Church of Staten Island has come together to hold a United Nations Sunday worship service, often using resources provided by the Unitarian Universalist Office at the UN, formerly known as the UNO. To honor the United Nations founding, we do this Sunday. We honor not only its founding in 1945, but its work. And we also use the Sunday to address the year's theme at the UN office. And this year, the theme is climate justice, food equity, and sustainability. Through congregational projects and the UU office at the UN, Unitarian Universalists around the world engage in liberal spiritual worship and do their part to bend the arc of history toward justice. As part of this year's UN Sunday, we will hear a presentation from Allison Hess from the UU office at the UN, and Allison will ask for a special donation from you to support the work of that office. Because food issues are complex, Allison will make big picture connections today between climate change and racial justice and food equity issues. On the Sunday after Thanksgiving, we will have another worship service on food issues that will center on local food insecurity and other issues and actions. Today's opening words are called Committed to Respond by Lynn Harrison. Committed to respond to the call of a wounded world, we join together this day with loving hearts, hands, and minds, embracing the interconnected web of water, air, and earth. We light a fire of sustaining hope, ever bright with love and justice. May we bring forth this day new wisdom, strength, and courage to create a new world, not of wealth, but well-being, a world of new peace and abundance for all. As we give thanks for this earth, our shared and singular home, may we dedicate ourselves to its ongoing care, rising to the calls deep within us and all around us. May we respond today and always with courage and with love. I will now light the chalice and say our chalice lighting. In the search for truth and the spirit of love, we unite for worship and fellowship. As an extension of chalice lighting, I want to take a moment to light another candle with some of the names of those recently affected by police violence. We cannot cover all of the names of those affected. So today I have 3 names. We light a candle for the life of George D. Watson. We light a candle for the life of Antoine Gilmore. We light a candle for the life of Robert Anderson. May these lights be a symbol of our commitment to continue to do the work of racial justice and to proclaim Black Lives Matter. It's now time for our, excuse me, hold on one second, our opening hymn. It's number 389, and the words should show up in your chat. It's called Gathered Here.
Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit draw near.
Sarah, you're muted.
Aha. Sorry about that. It's time for Joys and Sorrows. It's time now for you to type in the chat your joys and sorrows, and I will read them aloud. If you're visiting with us for the first time, you can introduce yourself in the chat. Okay, I'm waiting for a chat. Good morning, everybody. I see a lot of beautiful faces. No, I see a lot of names also. Morning, Virginia. Okay, I'm hearing from Susan Flint, everyone. Susan says, I'm recovering nicely and want to thank all who sent me well wishes. Okay, Maureen says, happy upcoming birthday to John Walker. Kathy Santos says, joy that we are visiting our lovely granddaughter and her family in Vancouver. Nice, they're coming in hot and heavy now. Allison says, it's a joy to be here with you all. Not my first visit, as I was with you physically for UN Sunday in 2016, but good to be together this morning. Sally Jones says, yesterday there was a gathering of friends from my old job. It was a joy to see everyone again. All right. I'm going to now, I think, move on to the reading. I'll give everybody one more second or two to add more. Aha, there's more. Randy Leeson says, last Friday, I went to the theater for the first time since COVID. Carolyn or Change at Roundabout. Carolyn or Change, okay. Sounds cool. Anybody else? One more second, one more chance. Okay, I'm going to move on to the reading. This is called Poetry for Liberation on the Land. It's an excerpt developed collectively, in a workshop led by Ariel Aronson Eves. It's called Nutrition. I come to the land with a longing for that which I do not know or have or need, for a connection beyond myself to other people and places and times. I come with a hunger for the spiritual aspects of matter, for a skillful way of living, tied to a sense of self and place. For foods of liberation, I come to the land in grief and with guilt for all that has been lost and stolen and denied, for children taken from their loving homes, for exploited workers upon whose lives our lives live, for broken connections. The weight of this and my tears pull me to the soil. I can hear your heartbeat, taste your sorrow, see your anger, smell your beauty, feel your love. It's now time for the offertory. I'm looking for my offertory words. Hold on one second. Aha, sorry about that. Now is the time in our service when we take an offering. We know it is the gifts of all of us that help support our ability to thrive and gather online or otherwise. Links and instructions will be provided in the chat. You can mail a check or donate to our PayPal giving page. Please give as generously as you can. Our offering will now be gratefully received. Today's offertory music is We Are Not Our Own.
We are not our own, earth forms us, human leaves on nature's growing vine, fruit of many generations, seeds of life divine. We are not alone, earth names us, past and present, peoples near and far, family and friends and strangers, show us who we are. Therefore let us make thanksgiving, and with justice willing and aware, give to earth and all things living liturgies of care. Let us be a house of welcome, living stone upholding living stone, gladly showing all our neighbors we are not our own.
You're muted again, Sarah.
Sorry about that. I will now take a few moments to introduce our speaker, Allison Hess. She serves as International Engagement Associate at the the Unitarian Universalist Association at the UN, where she works to connect American and Canadian UUs with opportunities to engage with our global faith, the work of the UN, and worldwide justice programs. She also leads the planning for the annual Intergenerational Spring Seminar hosted by the UUA office at the UN. Allison grew up in Thousand Oaks, California, and is a third-generation UU. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you to everyone for being here and for inviting me to join you this morning. Remember 2015? To me, it feels like a lifetime ago. I started a new job at the UUA at the beginning of that year, helping congregations connect with UN initiatives and the work of our UU office at the United Nations. And at the end of 2015, I just remember feeling so hopeful. In December, the Paris Climate Agreement was created. It was insufficient, but it felt like there was energy for meaningful change. A few months earlier, in September, all 193 member states of the UN had just unanimously adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which included 17 goals for a more peaceful, resilient, just, and prosperous world. The introduction to that 2030 Agenda includes the following statement. As we embark on this great collective journey, we pledge that no one will be left behind. Recognizing that the dignity of the human person is fundamental, we wish to see the goals and targets met for all nations and peoples and for all segments of society. And we will endeavor to reach the farthest behind first. End of quote. 6 years later, I hate to say it feels like a different world. Have we reached the farthest behind first? Not with global COVID vaccinations. Have we left no one behind? Not if you look at countries' weak commitments submitted for the UN Climate Summit that starts 2 weeks from today. Have we recognized the dignity of the human person? Not enough when marginalized people live in fear of those entrusted with community safety. There are so many ways that our world is hurting, and the pandemic has set us back on progress to achieve most, if not all, of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. But fulfilling the goals is still possible. Last year, the UN launched a decade of action to increase global activity for the SDGs with an eye toward 2030 as the year to achieve the goals. If you're not already familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, I know 17 is a lot to keep track of, but importantly, all 17 goals are mutually reinforcing, so we don't need to, we actually should not, we cannot address them separately. Today on UN Sunday, our theme is All In for Climate Justice, Food Equity and Sustainability. When we look for climate and food justice in the SDGs, we might first point to goals 13 and 2, climate action and zero hunger. But what about goal 3, good health and well-being? Or goal 10, reduce inequalities? Or goal 12, responsible consumption and production? I could do this all day. Climate justice, racial justice, gender justice, disability justice, labor justice, food justice, these all go hand in hand. Let me give a local example of some different intersecting issues. I live in Rochester, New York, which is home to the famous Wegmans chain of grocery stores. In March of this year, to mark the 1-year anniversary of the murder of Daniel Prude by Rochester police, Black Lives Matter activists protested outside the one remaining Wegmans grocery located inside city limits. At the time, some people were confused about what a grocery store had to do with racial justice. The activists were in part calling attention to one way that racial oppression manifests, which is as food apartheid. When it was starting out, Wegmans was a small grocery in the inner city of Rochester, where it served vulnerable communities. As their business took off, they shut down their smaller city stores and expanded in the suburbs. In a city that's 40% Black and 37% non-Hispanic white, the only remaining urban Wegmans store on East Avenue is only easily accessible to the wealthy, mostly white residents in the surrounding neighborhood. Thanks to a history of redlining, high-quality grocery stores are not present in other parts of town where more Black residents live. This is a classic example of how food apartheid arises. You may have heard the term food deserts. It's more commonly used than food apartheid, but it's also not quite accurate because often communities under food apartheid do have food. It's not entirely barren, but what's affordable and most accessible is food that's heavily processed and low in nutrients, like you might get from convenience stores and fast food. The term food desert also conceals the root causes of lack of access to healthy foods by implying that these areas are naturally occurring rather than the result of centuries of oppression. Food apartheid can show up in cities like Rochester, but also across regions of the world, resulting from legacies of colonialism and imperialism. Another important concept here is food sovereignty. It's essentially the idea that people should have control over the food that they eat. When food sovereignty exists in a community, their food reflects their culture. It's easy to find and pay for the ingredients that they want, and the foods are grown or processed in a way that corresponds with their values. Food sovereignty implies a personal connection to food and land, and an agency to make choices that does not and cannot exist in a system of food apartheid. Last month, the UN hosted a food systems summit aimed at transforming food systems globally to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. This was an opportunity for the world to recognize together the brokenness of current global food systems, where 1/3 of food produced for human consumption is lost or wasted every year, while around 1/10 of the world's people are hungry. During the summit itself, countries made national commitments after months of open dialogues with various stakeholders. The UUA office at the UN was part of an incredible interfaith movement convened by the Center for Earth Ethics that presented a faith plus food statement during the summit on September 23rd. It called on countries to take 11 specific actions to align their national production and consumption to sustainable, regenerative outcomes centered in equity and care for the most vulnerable. Our director, Bruce Knotts, pushed to strengthen the statement's language addressing hunger and starvation, and made sure that it highlighted the need for culturally appropriate food. As food is such an important part of cultural expression, what and how people eat matters as much, if not more, to them as getting enough nutrients. In immediate famine and crisis responses, the UN provides whatever nutrients they can get in fast. But in terms of sustainable food security and food sovereignty, communities need a say in what they grow, produce, and eat. In global food systems now, rather than food sovereignty, what we have instead are farmers forced by government incentives and multinational agro-development agencies to farm one particular type of crop using synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and GMO seeds that harm soil health and biodiversity, all through a system that leaves farmers in agonizing debt. Key to the food sovereignty conversation is the fact that grassroots and indigenous communities have a deep understanding of how to sustainably produce food that works alongside, not against, the Earth's natural systems. This is a core element of agroecology. The UN Food Systems Summit failed in critical ways to properly heed the input of those on the front line, the poor and hungry, as well as small-scale and landless farmers, workers, indigenous peoples, peasants, women, and fisherfolk, who are most affected by the current food crisis. The summit organizers were so focused on getting everybody together to create solutions that they didn't stop to ask, why does hunger exist? What's at the root of the problems? And so there was no discussion in the summit of accountability for those corporate actors that created the crisis in the first place. Instead, such entities like Nestle, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Tyson, and Bayer were invited to offer solutions and be part of shaping the summit agenda. In this context, and so many others, the job of civil society organizations like your UU office at the UN is to hold to account governments and others in and around the United Nations. Along with our interfaith collaborators, we've called for a series of actions, and now we get underway to keep the pressure up and monitor what they're actually following through on. The interfaith statement will also be presented at next month's UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, known as COP26. The United Nations is clearly not immune from political and economic influence. And yet people are coming together. Thousands convened virtually to boycott the summit and engage in counter mobilizations, lifting up agroecology, food sovereignty, and their solutions to the climate and food systems crises. There is a lot we can learn about how to revolutionize farming practices to address climate change. I'm not a farmer, but here are some basics as far as I understand it. In science class, you probably learned about photosynthesis, the process that plants use to extract carbon dioxide from the air and convert it into oxygen. When plants capture that carbon from the air, they store it in the soil. It's a process known as it's known as a carbon sink. The carbon is captured and stored in the soil. Healthy soil keeps carbon secure in the ground where it belongs. But frequent tilling and pesticide use thins out the soil and degrades it, so it can't hold on to the carbon, instead releasing it into the atmosphere. When the same land is used over and over to produce the same crops, the soil gets worn out. These are the important things to know. Growing different types of crops on the same land is healthy for the soil. It's also healthy nutritionally for people and healthy for the planet in terms of lowering carbon emissions. We essentially need as much biodiversity as possible. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, reported in 2019 that loss of biodiversity presents a major threat to food security globally. We're starting to see the influence of climate change, which is compounding threats to ecosystems from poor management of land and water, pollution, and overharvesting. Meanwhile, lack of genetic diversity leaves plant and animal species vulnerable to all these changes. When it comes to how to address issues like climate change, there's often a tension between those calling for systemic change and individual behavior change. I think you won't be surprised to hear me say, right, we need both. A Yes Magazine guide on how to get rid of throwaway culture invites us to consider that individual actions empower us to demand more from corporations and governments, and ultimately change social norms. This is true for consumption of food, as well as plastics, clothing, and so much more that makes capitalist society unsustainable. Shifting to plant-rich diets is one solution that often comes up in addressing climate change. It's important to clarify that not everyone can or should adopt an entirely plant-based diet. Many cultures around the world, notably indigenous communities, do have ways of sustainably raising livestock for food and should not be forced to give up those cultural traditions. Rather, the rest of the world should learn from them. Individuals may have dietary restrictions, sensitivities, or eating disorders that would make a plant-based diet a bad idea for maintaining their health. And of course, lack of access to nutritious plant-based options is yet another barrier that many face. And yet, for those who can, decreasing regular consumption of animal products is one essential move toward mitigating climate change. Often forests get cleared for livestock grazing, which first of all destroys the lush carbon capturing forests and their essential biodiversity. And secondly, cows emit methane, enormous amounts of methane, which is a harmful greenhouse gas. According to Project Drawdown, business as usual emissions could be reduced by as much as 70% through adopting a vegan diet, and 63% for a vegetarian diet, which includes cheese, milk, and eggs. The moral of this story is solutions to food insecurity and food apartheid are also solutions to climate change. Equitable and sustainable food systems can lead us toward climate justice. This is the message we've been bringing this year to the United Nations, and we hope you'll bring it to your local community as well. The new Code Red report from the UN IPCC Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in August showed us how urgently action must be undertaken to save our planet. It's getting harder, but it's always possible to make a difference and protect our ecosystems and one another. A new climate action podcast from the United Nations called No Denying It features an Indigenous leader and activist, Chief Dana Chizra-Tram, in the first episode. The host of that episode shared a powerful message to conclude, which I will share here. Listening to the land reveals that all is not well and hasn't been for a while. Listening to the land also reveals the solutions, which means for those of us who don't have that deep generational connection to the land, it's time to listen to people who do. Learn about Indigenous communities in your region, seek out their voices, hear what they are saying about what needs to change. Ask how you can be useful to the movement and pitch in. Because before we can act wisely, we have to listen deeply. May it be so. We now have a special collection time. I have a short video that I will play, inviting you to support your UU office at the UN. And so I'm just going to set up the screen share right now. Happy UN Sunday from the UUA office at the United Nations. Since our office was created in 1962, Unitarian Universalists have held a prominent place at the UN, advocating for UU values on the global stage. By engaging every day with member states and agencies and speaking out in defense of human rights and to protect our planet, our UU office has become a force to be reckoned with at the UN. We're working right now to mobilize a coalition within the UN community to address the global prevalence of violent repression of political opponents, minority groups, and others by increasingly militarized police forces. We know that only through collaboration and mutual support can our world address the most pressing issues of our time. For instance, the international community must come together to solve global problems like climate change. And we know that governments and multinational companies aren't the ones who have the right solutions. Solutions must come from communities that are most impacted by the changing climate. And our office at the UN is proud to be able to help representatives of those communities get access to attend international gatherings, like this November's UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, so that their perspectives can be heard at the decision-making tables. None of this would be possible without the generous support of Unitarian Universalists. The UU office at the UN relies on congregational and individual donations to continue its work. Please donate generously to sustain this important presence at the UN. Congregations with at least 5% of their members donating at a supporter level of $60 or more are on their way to achieving the 6th Principal Congregation Award. You can donate through text or online. To give by mobile phone, simply text UN Sunday to 51555. To give online, go to giving.uua.org/UU@UN. Thank you so much for your generosity. Your gifts can truly make a global impact.
Thank you so much, Allison, for your presentation. We will now have our closing hymn, the words to which will be in your chat. It's called Our World is One World.
Our world is one world. What touches one affects us all. The seas that wash us round about, the clouds that cover us, the rains that fall. Our world is one world. The thoughts we think affect us all. The way we build our attitudes, with love or hate we make a bridge or wall. Our world is one world. Its ways of wealth affect us all. The way we spend, the way we share, who are the rich or poor, who stand or fall. Our world is one world, just like a ship that bears us all, where fear and greed make many holes, but where our hearts can hear a different call.
Now time to extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, or the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. For these we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Closing words today are called Do Not Fear Agitation by Tanya Marquez. Do not fear agitation, for agitation is the rhythm of life itself, to be put into motion, to be stirred. Do not fear the movements that decenter what you always thought permanent. You carry within the center of your understanding the compass to show you the way. Carry with you the love that will hold you, the vision that will guide you, the relationships to all beings, and the world that will ground you. Go in peace and in gentle agitation to stir this world to the side of love. It's now time for the postlude. Thank you, Carolyn and Kevin and Allison. I think we're now in the chat or in the post meeting, though we still are being recorded, I see. Maybe Mike